Creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God spoke, and all things were made. He made light and separated it from the darkness. He made water and sky. He made dry land and plants and trees to fill the land. He made the sun to shine in the day and the moon to shine at night. He made the birds, and they filled the sky. He made the fish, and they filled the sea. And then he filled the dry land with animals of every shape and size. God made the whole beautiful world, and it was good. Last of all, and most special of all, God made people. He made a man named Adam, and a woman named Eve. And the Lord God was king over all his creation. Everything was very, very good. Sin and the Promise. Adam and Eve lived in a garden, but they didn't live there alone, did they? God came to be with them in the garden that he had planted for them. God loved Adam and Eve, and he wanted to be with them forever in the special place he had made for them. So he gave them a tree, a very special tree called the tree of life. When people ate fruit from this tree, it let them live forever. In the garden there were other trees too, all kinds of trees that were beautiful to look at and good to eat. Adam and Eve had everything they needed, and everything they knew was good. God gave Adam and Eve only one rule in the garden. Although there were many trees in the garden they could eat from, there was just one tree in the garden they were not allowed to eat from, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God told Adam and Eve, "Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. If you do, death and sadness and tears will come. Trust me on this. I know what's best for you." Adam and Eve understood God's rule, and they trusted him to know what was best. Life in the garden was wonderful. Every day there was a new and beautiful adventure full of good things. But one day, someone else came into the garden. He was a serpent, a snake, and he was more tricky and crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He hated God and wanted to ruin life in the garden. So he found Eve in the garden and began to question her about God, saying, "Did God really say you would die if you ate that fruit? You won't die," he said. "No, you will become like God. You'll know good and evil." Eve said to the serpent, "No, God said we may eat from all the trees in the garden except from the one in the middle of the garden. In fact, I'm pretty sure God said we can't even touch that tree or we'll die." "You won't die," the serpent said to the woman. "Take the fruit, eat it. God doesn't want you to be like him, knowing both good and evil." Do you think the serpent is telling the truth? No, he wasn't. Do you think Eve will believe him, or will she trust in God? Well, here's what happened. Eve walked right up to the tree in the middle of the garden. She looked up at the fruit, and she decided for herself that it looked pretty good. Now, she didn't ask for God's help. She just did what she wanted to do. She took some of the fruit, and, going against everything God had commanded, she ate it. And then, to make things even worse, she called Adam over and offered him some too. Do you think Adam reminded her of God's command? No, he didn't. He just ate the fruit without a single word. Then, suddenly, Adam and Eve understood what they had done. For the very first time, they knew what sin was. They had turned away from God's good way and followed their own way instead. They realized they were naked and tried to cover up their shame by sewing together fig leaves to make clothes for themselves. And when the Lord walked into the garden and called out to them, they were ashamed and they ran and hid from God. But the Lord God called out to them and found them where they were hiding. and said, "What have you done?" Adam blamed Eve, and Eve blamed the serpent, but really they were both to blame for disobeying God. Adam and Eve were sad, for they knew what they had done was wrong. And God was very, very sad that they had disobeyed him and broken their promise to him, for he knew how hard it was going to be for them now that sin and death and sadness would fill the whole world. Everything had changed now that sin had entered the world. God also knew Adam and Eve couldn't stay with him forever in the perfect garden he had made for them. Sin had made that impossible. But before they left the garden, God made clothes for them to cover them properly, and he sent them off with a promise. It was a very, very big promise that would shape the rest of history. Today, God said, "You must leave. You will live outside the garden, and then you will die. But one day I will send someone who will beat the snake, crush him, and triumph over him forever. I will send this serpent crusher to rescue you from your sin. He will fix everything that went wrong today." With God's promise ringing in their ears, Adam and Eve left God's perfect garden. Though they lived far from God's garden, God did not forget about them. He would keep his promise. For the Lord is good. His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations.